You ever have one of those moments where your entire world shifts in 30 seconds? Where everything you thought you understood about your place in the hierarchy suddenly crumbles? I'm Hannah Jones, and that moment happened to me on a rainy Thursday morning at Yellow River Enterprises. But let me start at the beginning, because the real story isn't just about one humiliating meeting, it's about 8 years of building something that mattered, only to watch it get dismissed in favor of corporate theater. I joined Yellow River straight out of graduate school, back when the company occupied a single downtown building and everyone knew everyone else's coffee order. The place had charm then, exposed brick walls in the break room, a reception desk made from reclaimed wood, and a CEO who remembered your birthday without consulting his calendar app. My first project was managing the relocation of our manufacturing division, not exactly glamorous work, but essential. While other new hires were chasing prestigious client-facing roles, I was coordinating with contractors, negotiating lease agreements, and ensuring that every piece of equipment made it to the new facility without disrupting production schedules. That project taught me something fundamental: the difference between looking important and being important. The executives who gave inspiring speeches about seamless transitions weren't the ones working until midnight to ensure the conveyor belts were properly aligned. But when Monday morning arrived and production continued without missing a beat, everyone understood who had actually delivered results. Over the years, I'd built my reputation on exactly that kind of unglamorous competence. When the Anderson crisis hit, our largest client threatening to cancel their contract due to quality issues, I spent 3 weeks living practically on-site, working with manufacturing teams to identify problems and implement solutions. Not flashy work, but the kind that saves jobs and preserves relationships. When we expanded into the Portland market, I managed the logistics while other department heads fought over who would get credit for the visionary strategy. While they debated market positioning in conference rooms, I was coordinating shipping routes, establishing distribution partnerships, and ensuring we could actually deliver on our ambitious promises. Each success built trust. Colleagues started coming to me when projects needed steady leadership. Clients requested me specifically for complex implementations. I wasn't the loudest voice in meetings or the most charismatic presenter, but I was the person you called when something absolutely had to work correctly. That's why Thursday's ambush hit so hard. Picture this: I'm walking into our executive conference room with my usual confidence, navy blazer pressed, presentation folder organized, coffee still steaming in my ceramic mug. The mahogany table stretched before me, surrounded by colleagues I'd worked alongside for nearly a decade. Sunlight filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting geometric shadows across familiar faces. The room felt different somehow. Conversations that should have continued when I entered instead faded into uncomfortable silence. Glances were exchanged, the kind that happen when everyone knows something you don't. Then Ron Blackwood cleared his throat. Ron was our vice president of operations, a man who joined Yellow River 18 months earlier with promises of transformational leadership. His corner office displayed motivational posters about disrupting comfort zones and embracing radical change. Today, his steel gray eyes held something I'd never seen before: calculated dismissal. "Hannah," he began, his voice carrying that particular corporate tone that makes your blood run cold. "Your track record speaks volumes. Consistent results, methodical execution, 0 major failures in 8 years. I should have recognized the setup. In corporate speak, consistent success is often code for predictable and lacking vision." However, Ron continued, savoring the word like expensive wine, Yellow River Enterprises is entering uncharted territory. The Meridian Industries contract, our largest potential client acquisition ever, requires revolutionary thinking. Bold strategies. Leadership that isn't bound by traditional limitations. The Meridian contract. I'd been developing that proposal for 6 months, building relationships with their technical team, understanding their operational requirements, crafting solutions that balanced ambition with realistic deliverables. The preliminary meetings had gone exceptionally well, largely because I'd done the homework to understand exactly what they needed. "I'm reassigning the Meridian project to someone who embodies our new direction," Ron announced, his smile sharp as a paper cut. "Someone who thinks in possibilities, not procedures." Enter Marcus Sterling. 29 years old, MBA from somewhere impressive, hired 6 months ago with promises of game-changing innovation. Marcus wore designer jeans with blazers and used terms like revolutionary synergy without irony. His PowerPoint presentations were masterpieces of style over substance, filled with colorful graphs that looked important but said nothing concrete. The humiliation was surgical in its precision. Ron could have handled this transition privately, could have preserved some dignity while making his change. Instead, he'd orchestrated this public execution, ensuring every manager witnessed my demotion from project leader to advisory consultant. Advisory consultant. Corporate purgatory with a fancy title. Hannah will provide background support and transition materials, Ron announced, sealing my fate with bureaucratic politeness. Her institutional knowledge will be invaluable in supporting the new strategic direction. I sat there, hands steady around my coffee mug, watching a decade of trust and collaboration dissolve. 8 successful product launches, countless crisis interventions, 3 major client rescues, all suddenly irrelevant because my approach lacked visionary disruption. The worst part wasn't the demotion itself. It was watching colleagues I'd worked alongside for years avoid eye contact, suddenly fascinated by their notebooks or phones. People I'd supported through their own professional challenges now unable to meet my gaze as my career was systematically dismantled. I didn't argue. Didn't defend my record or challenge his judgment. Didn't stand up and remind everyone about the Anderson crisis or the Portland expansion or any of the other situations where my careful planning had saved the day. I simply nodded, gathered my materials, and walked out with whatever professional dignity remained. But as that conference room door clicked shut behind me, something crystallized in my mind. Patience had always been my greatest asset. Today, it would become my most dangerous weapon. The next few days were a masterclass in corporate isolation. Colleagues who used to stop by my office for quick consultations suddenly found other routes through the building. Invitations to informal lunch meetings mysteriously stopped arriving. My access to certain databases was quietly restricted, and my opinions were no longer solicited during strategic discussions. Marcus, meanwhile, was everywhere. Conference rooms were constantly booked for his innovation sessions. He held impromptu brainstorming meetings in the break room, speaking loudly enough for half the floor to hear his revolutionary insights about paradigm disruption and exponential value creation. What Ron didn't realize, what nobody in that room understood, was that 4 days after my public humiliation, I'd received an unexpected call from Eleanor Vance, our chief financial officer. Eleanor was corporate royalty, the kind of executive who'd survived 3 regime changes by understanding that flashy presentations meant nothing without operational backbone. Hannah, she'd said during our discreet conversation in her corner office, we're restructuring our facilities and asset management division. The previous director accepted early retirement, and we need someone with your operational expertise to step in temporarily. The timing seemed coincidental, but Eleanor had been watching the political dynamics unfold. She'd observed Ron's aggressive reshuffling of personnel and understood that valuable institutional knowledge was being sacrificed for the appearance of bold leadership. The facilities position seemed mundane compared to strategic client relations, overseeing office assignments, equipment allocation, security protocols, maintenance scheduling, vendor relationships. Not exactly prestigious work, especially after managing multi-million-dollar client proposals. But Eleanor emphasized something interesting during our conversation: this role has evolved significantly over the years. Facilities management now coordinates with every department, manages all physical resources, and maintains oversight of operational infrastructure. It's become surprisingly influential. What she didn't explicitly state, but what I began to understand, was the scope of authority that came with controlling Yellow River's physical foundation. One piece of advice, Eleanor had added quietly as I prepared to leave her office. Pay attention to how people behave when they assume you're powerless. You'll discover everything you need to know about their true character. The new access card felt significant in my wallet, not just any authorization, but master control over Yellow River's entire physical infrastructure. Every office, every conference room, every supply closet, every piece of equipment that kept our company functioning now fell under my jurisdiction. I spent the first week quietly learning the scope of my new responsibilities. Facilities management wasn't just about maintaining office spaces, it was about controlling the physical foundation that made every other job possible. Conference room bookings, equipment allocations, security protocols, even parking assignments all flowed through my department. More importantly, I discovered that facilities management had oversight authority for operational audits and resource compliance reviews, bureaucratic tools that could be applied whenever organizational transitions or efficiency improvements were being implemented. Over the following days, I observed Marcus and his team scrambling to understand the Meridian proposal requirements. The project demanded detailed operational logistics, manufacturing capabilities, shipping protocols, resource allocation models, facility specifications, information scattered across multiple departments and systems. Information that now flowed through my office. I processed their requests with professional efficiency. Never delayed, never obstructed, always helpful and accommodating. But I also began noticing patterns in their approach that concerned me professionally. Marcus was making promises to the Meridian team about capabilities I knew we couldn't deliver on the proposed timeline. He was committing to shipping schedules that ignored our existing client obligations. His financial projections assumed manufacturing efficiencies that existed only in theoretical models, not actual production reality. Watching him work was like watching someone build a beautiful house on a foundation of sand. Impressive architecture, but doomed to collapse under real-world pressure. Meanwhile, I began conducting comprehensive reviews of every asset under my new authority. Company policy mandated periodic audits of all equipment and office assignments, policies Ron himself had championed as part of his operational excellence initiative. The irony was delicious. Ron's beloved efficiency programs had created exactly the bureaucratic framework I could now use to implement systematic oversight of his new strategic direction. I also discovered something fascinating while reviewing personnel files and workspace assignments. Marcus had been granted access to resources and information that typically required months of security clearance and performance verification. Ron had fast-tracked his approvals, bypassing standard protocols in favor of rapid integration. Those same protocols that I, as facilities manager, was now responsible for auditing and ensuring compliance with company policy. The pieces of my response began falling into place like a complex puzzle. Not revenge, that would have been petty and unprofessional. But a demonstration of why systematic thinking and careful planning weren't obstacles to success, but rather the foundation that made sustainable success possible. 2 weeks after my demotion, I received an interesting email from the Meridian Industries technical team. They were requesting clarification about some specifications in Marcus's preliminary proposal, details that didn't align with their understanding of our manufacturing capabilities. I forwarded the email to Marcus with professional courtesy, but I also began documenting the growing list of questions and concerns that were emerging from the client side. Each inquiry revealed another gap between Marcus's ambitious promises and our actual operational reality. This was exactly the kind of situation where my methodical approach would have identified potential problems early, allowing time for course correction before client relationships were jeopardized. Friday morning arrived with electric anticipation. The Meridian presentation was scheduled for 11 o'clock, with Yellow River's entire executive committee in attendance, including our CEO. Marcus had been pulling 18-hour days, crafting what he called a paradigm-shifting approach to client engagement. I arrived at 7:30, as always. My new office in the facilities management wing overlooked the executive parking area, where I watched Ron's black Lexus pull into his reserved spot. He practically bounced with excitement. This presentation would validate his bold leadership transition and cement his reputation as a visionary. What Ron didn't realize was that his vision was about to encounter the fundamental reality of operational limitations. At 9:15, exactly 1 hour and 45 minutes before showtime, my desk phone rang. "Hannah, something's wrong with Mr. Blackwood's office," his assistant stammered. "Everything's missing. His desk, his files, even his wall certificates. The whole place is empty." I gathered my audit documentation and took the elevator to the executive floor, my heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and professional determination. This wasn't about personal vindication, it was about demonstrating the value of systematic thinking in a world obsessed with dramatic gestures. Ron's office door stood wide open, revealing bare shelves, empty desk surfaces, and walls stripped of accumulated professional memorabilia. The space looked like a museum exhibit after closing time, impressive architecture with no actual content. Ron himself stood frozen in the center of this void, turning slowly like a broken compass. His usually immaculate appearance had cracked, tie loosened, hair disheveled, face flushed with rising panic. "Hannah," he barked upon seeing me. "What the hell happened here? Where's everything?" I consulted my official clipboard with calm professionalism, channeling 8 years of dealing with crisis situations. "Good morning, Ron. I'm conducting mandatory facilities audits as required by company policy. All items classified as Yellow River property have been temporarily relocated for inventory verification and compliance review." "Relocated where?" His voice pitched higher, betraying the first cracks in his executive composure. Secure storage facility. Standard protocol during operational transitions. I met his frantic gaze steadily. Your personal belongings remain completely untouched, naturally. Family photographs, personal books, that golf trophy collection, everything's safely packed in this container. I indicated a neat box by the doorway. But my presentation materials, the Meridian files, the operational data. Company property. Subject to comprehensive audit procedures. I flipped a page on my clipboard, revealing official documentation with Eleanor's authorization signature. According to facilities management protocols, any office space occupied by personnel undergoing significant operational changes requires complete asset verification and compliance documentation. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. Ron's own efficiency initiatives had created the bureaucratic framework I was now implementing. His beloved policies about eliminating redundancy and ensuring optimal resource allocation had granted me the authority to systematically audit his workspace and temporarily secure all company assets. Voices echoed from the hallway as other executives discovered the situation. Marcus appeared first, looking pale and desperate, clutching a coffee cup with trembling hands and a folder of hastily printed materials. "Hannah, we desperately need those files for the presentation," he pleaded. "The operational analyses, the resource projections, the facility specifications, the client relationship history, everything's in there. All materials will be returned following successful audit completion," I replied smoothly. Standard processing time is typically 72 to 96 hours for thorough compliance verification and documentation review. 72 hours. The Meridian presentation was happening in less than 2 hours. Marcus's face went through several color changes as the implication sank in. Without the foundational research I'd compiled over 6 months, his presentation would consist entirely of theoretical frameworks and aspirational projections, impressive-sounding concepts with no operational substance. Eleanor Vance emerged from the elevator bank, surveying the unfolding chaos with calculated interest. She'd authorized my facilities appointment and understood exactly what was transpiring, but her expression remained professionally neutral. "Difficulties, Ron?" she inquired with perfectly controlled professionalism. "Hannah has confiscated all my presentation materials under some ridiculous audit pretext," Ron sputtered. "This is obviously retaliation for the Meridian reassignment." "Audit procedures are mandatory company policy," Eleanor interrupted smoothly. "Especially crucial during leadership transitions and operational restructuring. We cannot afford to have critical assets misplaced or improperly allocated." She glanced toward me with subtle approval. "Hannah, what's the current status of this compliance review?" "Proceeding according to established protocols," I responded, consulting my documentation. "Though I could potentially expedite processing if Mr. Blackwood wishes to submit formal prioritization requests through proper facilities management channels. Corporate bureaucracy is beautifully democratic in its absolute equality." Ron, who'd spent months dismissing careful procedure as antiquated thinking and process paralysis, now confronted the full weight of systematic compliance requirements. No executive shortcuts, no bold leadership moves, no charismatic authority that could bypass methodical audit procedures. "This is completely unreasonable." Ron exploded, his professional composure finally cracking entirely. "I need immediate access to those materials." "I completely understand your urgency," I replied with practiced calm, drawing on years of crisis management experience. "However, Yellow River's commitment to operational excellence demands strict adherence to established protocols. Perhaps this situation demonstrates why cautious, methodical planning maintains fundamental value in organizational operations." The hallway fell into tense silence. Every executive present grasped the underlying message. Ron's public dismissal of my overly cautious methodology was receiving its systematic response through a demonstration of what occurred when caution was entirely abandoned in favor of dramatic gestures. Marcus stepped forward, desperation evident in his trembling voice and perspiring forehead. "Hannah, surely we can negotiate some accommodation? The client presentation represents months of preparation and relationship building." "We'll proceed," I stated firmly, maintaining professional composure while delivering the crucial point. "But it will proceed correctly, with proper documentation and verified resources. Precisely like every successful project I've managed during my tenure here." Eleanor nodded with obvious approval, understanding that this demonstration was about more than personal vindication. It was about organizational values and the importance of operational competence. Hannah, can you provide Mr. Blackwood and his team temporary access to standard presentation resources? Basic conference room setup and general company materials? Absolutely. Conference room C remains available, equipped with standard audiovisual systems. I can also authorize access to general company overview materials, market analysis documents available through our shared database network, and basic operational summaries. I paused meaningfully. Everything except the specialized operational data currently under mandatory compliance review. Ron's expression cycled through multiple stages of corporate grief, denial, anger, bargaining, and the dawning realization that his bold leadership approach had led directly to this operational nightmare. The Meridian proposal relied heavily on specific operational projections, detailed logistical capabilities, comprehensive resource allocation models, manufacturing timelines, and supply chain analysis, all information contained in files now secured in locked storage pending audit completion. How long for emergency expedited processing? Eleanor asked, maintaining her role as the reasonable executive seeking practical solutions. I referenced my clipboard documentation again, consulting official processing guidelines. Emergency expedited processing requires department head authorization, facilities management approval, operational impact assessment, executive committee endorsement, and compliance verification. Standard timeframe is 8 to 12 hours once all required documentation is properly submitted and processed through appropriate channels. 8 hours beyond the presentation deadline. The crowd in the hallway continued growing as word spread throughout Yellow River's executive offices. Something unprecedented was occurring, a quiet revolution disguised as routine administrative procedure. Ron Blackwood, renowned for bold, decisive action and revolutionary leadership philosophy, was being systematically outmaneuvered by the cautious planner he'd publicly humiliated just weeks earlier. This constitutes professional sabotage, Ron hissed, stepping aggressively closer, his executive polish completely abandoned. This constitutes protocol implementation, I replied evenly, refusing to be intimidated. Your protocol. Your efficiency initiatives. Your personal commitment to eliminating operational waste and ensuring optimal resource management throughout the organization. I allowed myself a slight smile. I'm simply implementing the systematic approach you've consistently championed in executive meetings. Eleanor positioned herself between us diplomatically, recognizing that the situation needed de-escalation while the fundamental lesson continued playing out. Ron, we have 90 minutes remaining before the Meridian presentation. What's your backup strategy? There it was. The question that exposed everything fundamental about leadership philosophy and operational competence. Ron possessed no backup strategy. His bold, risk-taking leadership approach had never contemplated scenarios where careful preparation encountered unexpected complications. He'd constructed his entire methodology around dismissing the systematic planning that creates alternative options and contingency solutions. I, however, maintained several backup strategies, because that's what competent operational management requires. I could authorize limited emergency access to essential materials, I offered quietly, presenting the olive branch that would allow everyone to save face. Restricted documentation, core operational data, sufficient information to proceed with modified presentation parameters. However, it would require formal acknowledgement that systematic planning and careful resource management constitute essential components of successful operations. The hallway filled with executives watched Ron wrestle with impossible choices. Public acknowledgement that his dismissal of my methodical approach had been strategically short-sighted, or professional humiliation when the Meridian presentation collapsed due to inadequate preparation and resource management. The silence stretched uncomfortably long, filled with the weight of organizational politics and personal pride. Fine, he finally conceded through gritted teeth, his voice barely controlled. Emergency access authorization. But this conversation continues afterward. Naturally, I agreed with professional grace. Following the presentation, we'll need comprehensive operational procedure reviews to prevent similar resource disruption incidents. Perhaps establish enhanced coordination protocols between strategic planning and facilities management divisions. Translation: Ron would need to collaborate with me, not circumvent me, if he wanted his bold initiatives to receive the operational support necessary for successful implementation. I escorted the group to secure storage, unlocked relevant materials, and observed Ron and Marcus frantically reorganizing their presentation with 45 minutes remaining. The Meridian proposal proceeded, but as a humbled, more realistic version that acknowledged operational constraints and logistical realities. The presentation itself was fascinating to observe. Marcus delivered his prepared remarks about revolutionary approaches and paradigm-shifting strategies, but when Meridian's technical team asked specific questions about implementation timelines and resource allocation, Ron was forced to provide conservative, methodical responses based on actual operational capabilities. The client approved the contract, but not because of Marcus's bold vision. They signed because Yellow River demonstrated the systematic competence required to deliver on ambitious commitments without compromising quality or reliability. That afternoon, Eleanor summoned me to her corner office for what I assumed would be a post-incident debrief. Fascinating morning, she observed with understated amusement, settling behind her mahogany desk. Routine facilities audit, I responded carefully. Though it certainly illuminated coordination gaps in our operational framework. Indeed. Ron has requested permanent collaboration structures between strategic planning and facilities management. Apparently he's developed newfound appreciation for systematic approaches. She leaned forward slightly. He's also recommended you for promotion to a newly created position, Director of Strategic Operations. The irony was perfect. Ron's attempt to sideline me had ultimately demonstrated my value to the organization and led to career advancement beyond anything I could have achieved through conventional channels. The position would combine long-term strategic planning with operational oversight, Eleanor continued. Essentially, you'd ensure that bold visions have the systematic foundation necessary for successful implementation. Interested? 6 months later, I was working directly with Ron on major client initiatives, his bold vision balanced by my methodical execution. The partnership proved remarkably effective, his ability to inspire and motivate combined with my capacity to deliver consistent results. Marcus, meanwhile, had been transferred to a business development role better suited to his presentation skills and creative thinking. No hard feelings, everyone found their appropriate niche within the organizational structure. The Meridian contract became one of Yellow River's most successful client relationships, largely because we'd established a foundation of realistic expectations and systematic delivery from the very beginning. Sometimes the quiet revolution proves most powerful. Sometimes patience isn't passive weakness, it's the sharpest instrument in your professional arsenal. Sometimes the person who appears sidelined has positioned themselves exactly where they need to be to transform everything. If this resonates with your experience, remember, never underestimate systematic thinking's power, and never assume the quiet person has been defeated. We're often simply waiting for the perfect moment to remind everyone why careful planning built the foundation everything else depends upon. The infrastructure always wins eventually.